Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second session for the Spiritism Online. This is a broadcast that started by Daniel Mussi out of California, and we've been helping him by creating a second option for folks to join in. This is our second session. We haven't had anybody join in yet, but hopefully that people will learn more about the time. We're broadcasting this not every Saturday, but on Saturdays at 1 p.m. Dubai time. And that's approximately around 9 a.m. London time. Hopefully we will see some people join us in due time. But we'll be recording this. So you're welcome to continue to watch this at your leisure through the website. We'll have a link to the YouTube recording of all of the sessions. This is my wife, Sandra Mussi.
Hi, everybody.
And I'm Joe Mussi. Welcome to the second class. So let's start with introduction prayer. So
Yes.
ask Sandra to start us off.
Sure. So in this beautiful day, it is with our hearts filled with gratitude and love that we welcome Jesus in our hearts and in our minds. And we ask all the beautiful spirits that are present with us to bright up our minds and our hearts for the lessons that we are about to learn. And also to give love, peace, and harmony throughout this hour to this beautiful world that we inhabited. Thanks to be God, and so be it.
So be it. So today, continue after the first lesson, which was a very quick introduction to Spiritism and what it is. We start with some discussion around one of the three tenets or pillars of Spiritism. As we described earlier, Spiritism is a combination of a science, a philosophy, and a religion. So that's very interesting. That's not something you find in other religions. And it's very unique to Spiritism. So today we'll start discussing the first one of those pillars in no particular order. But we'll start with the science, which to me has a very particular importance because for many years as a spiritual skeptic and a scientist, I always questioned religions in general. I had many questions, many doubts. And with time and learning more and more about Spiritism, I became a believer. So science was the hook that got me in. Everyone has their particular way of coming into Spiritism. And that's what's one of the many beauties of this doctrine. Mm-hmm. So we'll start by asking a simple question. Why? Why a science? Right? Why is Spiritism associated with the science? Well, it begins with its very name, Spiritism, word coined by Allan Kardec, who himself was a teacher and a scientist. And if you just decompose it into the Latin, it means the science of the spirit. Mm-hmm. So what brought Allan Kardec originally into the curiosity in his own personal journey from a Christian, a Catholic, as most French at his time were, into this discovery of something very new, very different that intrigued him, was a number of coincidences that we know are not coincidence, but to him was a number of events that led him to some small rooms in Paris where they were these sessions where people were amused by this unique and very new phenomenon of what they call the turning tables. Mm-hmm. So why don't you explain to us what were the turning tables, Sandra? What was unique and what was fun about it?
Well, the turning tables started in France, in Paris, and actually started with something that was very mysterious and very curious, because it had to do with things that people could not explain, but always wanted to know, which is things beyond what they could see. So this is, they would get around one round table, and they would ask questions, and then the spirits would answer the questions. And that became something, even we can say, fashionable back then. And that was people from even high society would have that during parties. They would make parties to have people come and ask those questions. And Allan Kardec was really curious about that, because one of his friends, actually, who was a doctor, was intrigued by that and talked to him and explained to him what was happening. And he got very, very curious, because as a scientist, he said, well, the table cannot answer questions. And then that's how everything started.
Well, in fact, even before Kardec got introduced to all of this, the story takes us back a few years to a phenomenon that happened in the USA, which was with three sisters called the Fox sisters, which they had their first encounter with a spiritist communication or spirit communication, very unexpectedly, very surprisingly, and I'm not sure everybody knows about the story. But it goes that they were living in this small town in western New York State, and actually part of it, they came and they were living in Canada at the time. Canada and the US had very open bound borders. But one particular night, one of the sisters starts here banging on the walls and noises in the house. It scares everybody. They think was just the house being the house and creaking and so forth. But soon they started to become more and more concerned because it wouldn't go away. And eventually they realized that the house or something was communicating with them. And over time, they established slowly and meticulously this mechanism where the taps would represent letters. So the letter A was one tap, letter B was two taps, and so forth. And with a very slow and painful method, they were actually able to write whole sentences out of it. And the story goes that they eventually then find out that there was a murder in that house and that the deceased was buried underneath the house. And then they find out who had killed them was the prior owner of the house. So they became very, very famous, not least subject to a lot of controversy, because later years they tried to monetize or take advantage of their notoriety. One of the sisters had a lot of emotional issues and eventually came out and said that it was all fake, but then she reversed it. In any case, it was the first documented modern occurrence of what we would call today as Spiritist communication. And in the US, out of this and other things that were happening at the time, because we know in the spiritual world, nothing happens in a single place. There's a coordinated series of events that take place in many different circumstances. A spiritualist movement started in the US. And eventually, people from this movement take boats and trips, and they take them to Europe. And out of this kind of interest, the curiosity, eventually we have this occurrence of the turning tables, where people would ask now the table for questions, and the table would turn and answer yes or no. Again, not least many discussions around being a hoax, being fake, proven as cases where people were being fooled by this. And for that time, it was not really taken seriously. It was a parlor game. Things that people did, especially in high society, always curious for the next fashionable thing, next fad to do. Then they would drink and eat and have fun, and then at later time at the night, they would sit down around a small table and somebody would facilitate, or we call be the medium that would do this. So Kardec goes to one of these sessions because everybody was talking about them, and his friends convinced him, much against his initial instinct to go. And, he starts to think about it. He realizes it could be something that's not 100% correct. But he starts, as a scientist, says, okay, what if? He rationalizes that, of course, the table doesn't have a kind of intelligence. And in his mind, any intelligent effect, if he could prove that was an intelligent effect, had to have an intelligent source behind it. Something intelligent has to be behind an answer. So if something is understanding the question and answering yes or no, or whatever they were doing, there must have been an intelligence behind it. And that was the very beginning, because he tries to find ways to weed out the hoax and the tricksters and those who were trying just to have fun, to other cases where he could not rule out there was something very unusual and something very unexplained taking place. And that first step takes him into this incredible journey. Mm-hmm. He was not a young man. He was in his 50s when this first starts. And it would take him for almost 20 years into the journey when he first heard about this, to the point that he then codified the doctrine for us. As a scientist, he tried to make sure that all of his investigation, all of his documentation was based on current practices of how to do a scientific study. He obviously tried to get as many different points or sources of information as possible. He creates a network of similar interested people around the world. And he starts to draw out what would be this new science. He gives it a name. So the word Spiritism did not exist before that time. Mm-hmm. So it means, as I said, science of the spirit. He creates another word called medium. Of course, medium already existed, but in the sense of spirituality, he defines a medium as any person, we will know that later as an incarnated spirit, who, for whatever means, and he couldn't explain everything, was able to communicate with discarnated spirits, either through hearing them, seeing them, being inspired by them, right? Being kind of driven to write by them. And as a medium, they were the intermediates between any communication that came from the spiritual world to the physical world. And that establishes the foundation of Spiritism as the science. And Kardec really did this mostly by himself in terms of the scientific structuring of the doctrine. And he did a wonderful job, obviously, right? Because he kept meticulous notes that then were used even after his death to continue to introduce new concepts, new discussions. And it starts to really solidify or create some strong rationale of what he called rational faith. Mm-hmm. As a Christian, he was always induced to this faith because it was told that you have to believe, right? You were indoctrinated. Mm-hmm. And often we see among our English-speaking friends that they don't like the word doctrine because it has this implication of indoctrination, that somebody is kind of almost brainwashed into believing something, and nothing is further from the truth. So maybe we should use the word teachings, as was mentioned by one of the people in a previous session with Daniel. So teachings, so these teachings tells us how we have come to existence, how the interaction between the spiritual and the physical world happened. And it really comes more and more into the scientific realm as Kardec starts writing his later books, in particular Genesis, right? Where he takes a meticulous time to contextualize Spiritism within the body of knowledge that science had. And I remember that 19th century France was the place to be as a scientist, right? Mm-hmm. It was the center of all scientific discoveries that were being done. Obviously, it was being done in other countries as well, but France still held that particular reputation. Everybody that was more educated were aware of the scientific discoveries, among them magnetism, electricity. These created all of these wonderful possibilities. It's hard for us living in the 21st century to really understand the leap that it was for somebody who was living before the discovery of electricity, after the discovery of electricity.
So Joe, let me ask you a question. So you start saying that the scientific, the rationale behind Spiritism was the thing that got you really intrigued and you wanted to know more. We can see that North America, this is very true too. The North Americans, they need to understand something before they even get into the, they need to learn, they need to understand, they need to rationalize whatever is presenting to them before they even get more intrigued and wanting to learn more about Spiritism. Did you find with the experience that we had in Canada that this is still true? Because with everything that Spiritism brings, all the rational, all the science behind it, do you think this is still true, or do you believe that there is still a lot of resistance, even given them all the rational faith that Spiritism can give them?
There's obviously still a lot of resistance, right? Established religion, especially in North America, is Christian-based, right? And people learn it and are taught that faith from the very day they were born, right? They are educated, they go to Bible school, they go to the church, and they're given all of the information based in the frame of that religion. For them, they separate that belief from their day-to-day beliefs as well, many of them. Obviously, there's a number that really take the religious belief to a completely absolute faith in it. Others can't reconcile the two, right? So I met a lot of people who look at the story of the Genesis and says, oh, of course, the universe wasn't created in 7 days. Of course, you know, we've been on Earth. Earth is billions of years of old, not thousands of years of age. So they react against the conservative view of Christianity, especially North American evangelical. And, you know, they stick with what they've learned from the scientific world around evolution, around our own kind of growth from animals and everything else that has done in terms of the history of the planet. They can't reconcile this with what they read in the Bible. But they've been taught the Bible. So there's a part of them that still wants to believe many of the ideas that the Bible has, but they are kind of pushed away from the things that they've completely rationalized. It can't be true. And this is where Kardec really comes in with Genesis, and he tries to explain some of these things. Right? It's not a full scientific proof for many, but he does provide rationale that's very unique in explaining some of the things that the Bible explains, and says it's not completely unlined with what science has given us. To me, a part of a key turning point was obviously there's this big leap of faith that we have to do, that we have this physical world And there's another complete invisible world called the spiritual world that we don't see, we don't interact, that somehow we transition between one and the other, right? So for the last 100, 200 years, science has really focused on the physical world because that's the things we can measure, that's the things that we can see and touch and everything else. But interesting enough, science has taken a full loop now because with the discovery of dark matter, dark energy, science has proven that there is things out there that we don't see, but we know it's there scientifically.
Mm-hmm.
And this, in many ways, is what Kardec did. He said, there's a lot of things we don't see, but I can show you why you have to believe that they exist.
Okay.
And maybe all of this dark matter and dark energy is nothing but the spiritual world.
Yeah, I agree. And you were talking about the rationale. And I remember that's back almost 20 years ago when we didn't have that many books translating to English, and we were in Canada, and you were translating some of the books to me and from Chico Xavier. And I remember that this was your first thing, and you came to me and we had dinner with Canadian friends, and you were explaining to them how Spiritism, what it is, Spiritism, and how that different from the Christian faith as we were raised in the Christian faith. And I look at you and I said, who is this man? He was just translating, and now he's a true believer. So what did it, how this happened to you?
This is not supposed to be about me. It was about the science.
I know, but because you said that was this science that got you hooked. So that's why I'm picking on your brain to get the science. For me, it wasn't. For me, it was the religion aspect. So that's why I'm asking about the scientific.
One of the things
aspect.
I like about Spiritism, and when we start to even learn the most basic aspects of it, it's very simple. There's not a lot of complexity in terms of what it teaches us. The story about us being created simple and ignorant, evolving a little bit at a time over many, many incarnations towards perfection, or whatever that means for a spirit, because we can't compare a spirit's perfection to God's perfection. And that's always a mistake that people fall into a trap of that. And all of the moral consequences of that very fact, that very simple explanation of a journey that we do, it becomes then easy for us to validate the various aspects that we questioned before. So for example, why do some people die so young? Why do some people suffer without having had any reason to be punished by God? Why does God allow all of the bad things to happen in this planet? So we start putting these kind of questions against this very simple framework, and the answers are there. There's nothing that it can't be explained. There is a faith, there's a rational faith, but remember, rational faith still has the word faith in it. So there's still a faith that you have to take the last little edge and really believe, because we don't get all the proofs we want, right? We don't get Jesus incarnating in front of us just because we want proof that Jesus existed, right? So there is that faith, but it is a rational faith. It's a faith that is founded on a number of analysis and thoughts that you put a number of options on the table and say, okay, could it be this? Could it be that? Could it be something else? And you start to go through this exercise, and every one of them seems to be, okay, Spiritism has a very nice answer for that, right? It fits well. And you don't find contradictions. You don't find anything that basically needs for you to reverse completely. I still have some kind of questions around spirits living in planets as close as our solar system, because we don't have any proof of that. And we started to go to some of these planets, like Mars, like Jupiter. And, you know, it's hard to imagine spirits living there, but that's because we still don't fully understand what living there would mean.
Exactly. And because we think as us, they would be as us, needing what we need to be living on Earth. And these are different planets, and these are different spirits who needs different needs too, who has different needs than we have.
And not only that, it could have been 500 million years ago that they were living there.
Exactly.
Because these planets now evolve, and maybe they've gone past their useful life, and now spirits are being incarnated. And now we discover, again, science proves that there are millions and millions of planets just like Earth. So even if we want to think of us as spirits incarnated in other planets, and we can't understand how they became incarnated in a very hostile planet that's very different from ours, we know that there's millions of other planets that could be very, very similar to Earth. Mm-hmm. So all of these things just create this body of evidence that no other religion can bring together. Mm-hmm. And what's most fascinating is the area that most religions have always failed to describe. And they all believe in the soul, and all believe in the eternity of the spirit, and using their own words. Could never explain what happens after we die. It's very kind of, oh, you got to have faith that's going to be wonderful. In some cases, beliefs that you go to hell, where that's going to be very terrible. But really doesn't describe the purpose. It doesn't describe the interactions of these spirits. What do they do? How do they interact? Mm-hmm. It's very cloudy. Right? They never bothered to go through the explanation, because most of these religions were focused on the evolving and the evolution of the civilizations, very focused on the material message of the religions, mm-hmm. even though they call themselves spirituals.
That's true.
And you, what do you kind of, not being a exact scientist, what do you see as the science in Spiritism?
I think it's just the way Kardec codified his books. I think the way he presented, especially the Spirit's book, you know, all the questions that he asked and the way that the Spirits answered them. For me, the Spirit's book and Genesis were the two books that really focus more on the scientific aspect of Spiritism. And in that sense, it makes sense. It makes sense for me. And I felt that when I started, the first time that I read the Spirit's book, I felt all my inner questions were answered, and even questions that I never even thought of them. They were asked by Kardec, and then the spirits were answering the questions, and it felt that need that my spirit urged was being responded by the spirits and by Kardec through his questions. So I think this is the aspect that put together with the philosophy and also with the religion side, just feel that huge hole, that not knowing what's going to happen after life, not understanding that somebody that I love dearly in this life just disappears after death, and that's it. So getting all those questions, not, you know, like the injustice of God or the justice of God, it's well explained, and you just feel that space in my heart and in my mind that was urging for answers. The Genesis, you know, like when you try to explain the miracles of Jesus that Jesus brought, it explained that what are miracles. So that explained in a way that I could understand, and I could relate, and I got it. It's not somebody that is telling me, it's my whole mind is working together when I'm reading and I'm getting it, and I say, oh, that makes sense. So for me, it's not being told. I still have the faith, but I wasn't being told what to believe and not to believe. I was given a chance, and I was given that beautiful curiosity of mine to get it was being developed by every question that I was reading. I said, oh my God, I was so excited. So it's something that still excites me till today. It's something that I'm looking forward for science to come and prove Spiritism wrong, and it hasn't happened. It's quite the opposite. So it's and also, you know, the best thing is that puts you together with me in this lifetime into this beautiful journey that I think Spiritism has brought us, and gave us a more steady way and just a beautiful way of seeing the world through different glasses.
And in this topic, it's very interesting for people who have more of a rational, scientific persona. I don't even have to say, you don't have to be a scientist to have that persona, is that it's much easier to relate back to Kardec.
Mm-hmm.
Because he didn't have this spiritual encounter, right?
No.
He wasn't a religious person.
That's true.
He wasn't a prophet himself. He wasn't, he wasn't approached by a God or Jesus or angels like other prophets. He was just someone like us.
He wasn't a medium.
He was just someone like us who was going by his life, and then suddenly he finds something he can't explain. And as a scientist, he's curious.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a challenge. He's got a mystery, right? And we all love watching mysteries on TV and shows and trying to find out, who done it and everything else. That's his curiosity. His scientific curiosity led this journey.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easy to relate to that because we all kind of have that same curiosity in different stages and different manners. But who hasn't asked the question, why and how and, what's going to happen? And the turning tables was just the kind of the hook that got him in. And he basically moves away from the phenomenon very quickly because he wasn't interested in the phenomenon. He was interested in the implications of the phenomenon.
Yes.
Right? Because there is nothing that could explain those phenomena based on the science that existed at the time. So he had to create a new science to put together the hypothesis and then try to prove them or disprove them one at a time. And I'm sure that even though we see the hypothesis that he was able to prove, that during that process, he had many hypotheses that he put forward that he himself disproved.
Yes.
And never made it into any of these books.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't even know kind of all the stuff that he might have thought were true, right? And all of the possibilities and all of the things that then he basically discarded because he could not show evidence that made those hypotheses true. So what survived through that process, through that careful analysis and careful collection of data, and that's what he was doing, again, as a scientist, collecting data rather than relying on a single source, a single person, a single medium, or a single event to shape everything. He was collecting data over years, and then finding a way to put this together in a way that he could explain it. That's what we mean by codification. So what does it mean to codify? The codification is to take not teachings that came as ready to go, right? But taking all these little bits of information, of explanations, of questions and answers and ideas, and putting it together in a way that it became a whole. That's what the codification did. And then he used this fantastic means of question and answer book, which was his first book, the Spirits book. And it makes it easier, at least to start going through each one of them and trying to analyze what they mean to you, what they were trying to say. And, we've gone through a number of studies, structure studies in Canada and here in Dubai. So we've gone through this book 5-6 times, and every time it's a different experience.
Yes, because every time we are different experiences ourselves. So every time that you learn more about life and this, infinite work that we are as humans. So every experience that we go through, we learn something about us, and then we evolve. And when we start evolving more and more, we can now absorb things in a different way, in a different perspective that makes even more sense. So I imagine that this book I'll be studying
many more times.
Many more times. I remember that Givaldo Franco once they were asked, he asked Joana de Angelis, he had read this book, I don't know, maybe 100 times, and he asked her, how many more times do I need to read this book? And the simple answer was many more to come. So
as if you're asking the question, you haven't read it enough yet.
Yeah, exactly. That was it. So it's something that we will forever be learning from, the Spirit's book.
Very good. Well, let's stop here today. We'll be back, I think, in 2 weeks now. Hopefully, we'll get someone to join us. It'd be lovely to have online dialogue. But in any case, we're happy to be doing these recordings. You can watch them at your leisure. Go to the Spiritism Online website, put your comments in. We'll have a look at the chats and the forums. If you have any questions, comments, that would be great. And hopefully you will enjoy this journey as we have enjoyed.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So let's finish this with, again, a very simple prayer. Thanking God for giving us this treasure, which is Spiritism, which provides us answers, provides us direction, gives us a sense of our existence, our purpose. Always open our heart and our mind to these lessons so we can continue to learn and grow in our eternal journey. So be it.
So be it. Thank you very much, and hope to see you not next Saturday, the Saturday after.
That's correct.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.